Hello and welcome to another episode about Jewish homeschooling. First of all, I wanted to explain a little bit why this channel is named Jewish Charlotte Mason. Charlotte Mason is the philosophy that we follow, but by no means are we going to be discussing solely Charlotte Mason topics this summer. Actually, the opposite, we'll barely be touching on it. But this is my channel, and so this is where they're going. But today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the legalities regarding homeschool. One of the first questions that I always get is, are you allowed to homeschool? And the answer is yes, you are allowed to homeschool. They are your children, you can educate them. The question is how. So the answer is easy and complicated. So the easy answer is if you Google the name of your state and HSLDA right here. HSLDA is the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and it's an organization that was formed to create sort of a lobbying arm in part and a legal protection arm in part for Christian homeschoolers. They accept anyone, but it was primarily sort of created with Christian homeschoolers in mind, and a lot of their material is Christian. And so there's debate among non-Christian homeschoolers about if you should join HSLDA. We personally belong, but it basically, the benefits of HSLDA, outside of supporting their mission of protecting homeschoolers generally, there's definitely Christian elements. I'm not gonna sugarcoat with that, and that's just something that we swallow and deal with. But there's also legal protections that their offices provide any family who are members. If you have filed a notice of intent and your county doesn't like it, you can CC their lawyers if you're a member, and their lawyers have your back. There have been varied reports about how much they have your back, but there was a family within the Jewish homeschooling realm in Florida who has attested that they help them a great deal. And so your mileage may vary. I wish I had a better answer for you. And hopefully you would never need their services. But the question is, how do you legally homeschool? And the answer is on their website. If you Google HSLDA and the name of your state, they have the answer. And the regulations vary a lot by state. So this is a map that HSLDA has created that sort of explains the state's regulations. And some states have a lot of regulations and some states have none. And that might actually surprise you because New Jersey actually has none, but New York has a lot. And so their website will provide you with a list of the regulations per state. It might be a little bit different for you if you never enrolled your child in public school. So that's something to keep an eye out on. If there's any withdrawal requirements for people who had their kids in public school versus private school. So I wanted to go over a little bit about the regulations per state in states where there are a lot of Jews. Because there's some states where there's a lot of us, like New York and New Jersey and Florida and California and Maryland. And there's some states where there's probably one, like North Dakota. So I wanted to first touch on New York, which is one of the most complicated states where there's a lot of Jews to homeschool. And on their website, if you Google HSLDA New York, there's a list of the rules that you need to follow in order to homeschool. And so the first thing is you need to submit a letter of intent. This is one of the ways that an HSLDA membership might be helpful because they have form letters that members can access. But if you just Google letter of intent, New York, homeschool, I'm sure that you will come up with what you need. I always suggest documenting everything. And so scan the envelope, document that you've mailed it on a certain day. You might even want to get get tracking from the post office that they have indeed received it. It's not a bad idea to CYA to cover your behind. The next thing is in New York, the next step after you submit that letter of intent is to submit an individual home instruction plan. It's called an IHIP. That is information that New York specifically requires. And so that's another thing that you might want to either look at the resources that HSLDA has or just Google New York IHIP. And it's not a bad idea in general to have a plan for what you're going to be doing in your homeschool for the year. But this is a specific legal requirement that New York has when you first file your information for homeschooling. Sorry, I'm looking at my computer because New York is really complicated. So the next thing is to comply with our day, hour, and subject requirements. And so New York has a list by age group. They break it up into grades K through, or 1 through 6, 7 through 8, and 9 through 12. And you have to document the attendance. And so that's really, it's just, and what I do personally is I keep a daily planner and I say, these are the things we're doing this day, check off. And that's basically what's required. And then you also need to file quarterly reports with your district superintendent. And that should include the number of hours of instruction during the quarter, the description of the materials that you covered for each subject, and a grade or a narrative evaluation in each subject. And those reports are also available to HSLDA members in New York. Or another suggestion that for anyone, not just New Yorkers, join local Facebook groups and just look up New York homeschoolers on Facebook, for example, and ask people what they do and what their forms look like. There's a lot of reasons to do that. You want your kids to have friends, but also those resources will provide state-specific information about how you can homeschool in your personal state. There are 50 of them. The last thing is in New York to assess your child annually. And so that assessment is a standardized test, which kind of stinks because that's part of the reasons why a lot of people choose not to homeschool. But it is what it is in New York, unfortunately. The other option is to provide a written narrative evaluation with the consent of your local superintendent. So that's another option that you have in New York. So that is New York. And so now I wanted to move on to New Jersey, right over the river. It's a very different situation in New Jersey. I'm surprised, honestly, by the laws in New Jersey because it's a highly regulated state, but not highly regulated homeschooling. So how to comply with the New Jersey homeschool law is pretty simple. If you under New Jersey law, you have to give your child an education that is academically equivalent to what they would receive in school. Equivalent does not mean identical, so you don't have to have a desk sitting them there. For comparison purposes, New Jersey's public high schools offer instruction in the following areas: language arts for 4 years, math for 3 years, science for 3 years, world history for 1 year, civics or New Jersey or United States history for 2 years, health, safety, and physical education for 2.5 hours per week for the 4 years, financial, economic, education of some kind for a semester, visual performing arts for a year, foreign language for a year, career, technical, or vocational education for a year. And so basically all you have to do in New Jersey is agree that you will be educating your children in those subjects, and then sometimes provide notice. It really depends on your county. Sometimes you don't even have to tell them. You can just do it, which is interesting in comparison. So sometimes school districts require that families submit written notice that they're homeschooling or get approval from the district, but that's not required by law. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind, that sometimes your school district will demand things that are not legal. And you should know the law so that you can call them out on it. There's been a lot of stories that have circulated in homeschool communities where people have said, I was told that I had to submit this form and this information, and my state doesn't require it. And if that happens, that's obviously where an HSLDA membership is helpful, or having a lawyer in the family who can write a letter for you and just say, no, that's not legal. A lot of school districts don't know the law, and they're not super keen on homeschooling in general because it kind of encroaches on their turf. So it's really important to know the law so that you can push back against intrusion that is not legal. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the California homeschool laws. There's actually a large Jewish community in Los Angeles that homeschools, and so if you live in the state of California, around Los Angeles, you should inquire with people in your synagogue or in your community. There's a nice community in California. And also, I actually want to rewind a little bit. On Long Island, there's also a fair amount of homeschoolers who have a popular WhatsApp that if you live on Long Island and you homeschool, ask around because it exists as of now. So anyway, rewinding back to California. So you have three options with how you homeschool in California. The first option is to homeschool as a home-based private school. So you have to sort of establish a home-based private school. The second option is homeschooling with a private school satellite program. You're operating with a private school that has an online option. That's your second option. And your third option is homeschooling via instruction by a private tutor. So the California laws are pretty complicated, and they really vary depending upon one of those three options that you choose. And so this is one of those instances where I'm just going to say, if you live in California, do some research and talk to people, because it can be a little bit complicated, but I know a lot of homeschoolers in California. I know it can be done. It just might take a little bit of planning on your part to make sure that it's being done according to the laws. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the laws here in Maryland, where I live. You basically have two options. You can homeschool under an umbrella, which is a religious umbrella, and the umbrella are the people who are overseeing your homeschool. Or you can homeschool by sort of submitting yourself to evaluations with the school district. I think that those evaluations are twice a year. I probably should have looked it up beforehand, I apologize. But if you Google HSLDA Maryland, you can figure that out. We personally go the umbrella option, which is why I don't know about how often you have to submit yourself to an evaluator in Maryland. So we use an umbrella, and we meet with the umbrella twice a year. So that's actually an indication that that's probably the law. We meet twice a year. It was over Zoom this past this last sort of round because COVID. But generally we met together in someone's home, and we had a conversation, and then we sort of talked about what was working for us, what was not working for us, curriculums that we were using, resources that we were using. It was a great opportunity to have a conversation with fellow local homeschool moms about what's working and what's available. So there's two options as far as that goes in Maryland that I'm aware of on the umbrellas. There's something called LHUG, LHUG, which is, it's technically Lubavitch, but you don't have to be Lubavitch to use LHUG. And the other option is called Ashreinu. If you Google either of these things, or if you email me, I'm happy to send you that information. But those are the two Jewish umbrellas in Maryland. There are other umbrellas that are Christian or secular. Your mileage may vary. Florida is another state where there are a lot of Jews, and there are not as many regulations in Florida as there are in the rest of the country. So in Florida, there's also three options on how you can legally homeschool. The first is to homeschool under the homeschool statute, which is basically you're following the laws of the state. Another option, it's similar to Maryland, homeschooling under a private school umbrella program. There are Jewish ones. I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but if you talk to other Florida homeschoolers, there's a couple of great resources out there just in general for Jewish homeschoolers. There's a Facebook group called Jewish Homeschoolers with an emoji heart. That's sort of a catch-all for people who are secular and Orthodox and everywhere in between. And I know that there are a number of Florida homeschoolers in there. It can get a little bit tricky depending on your county. The woman who recommended HSLDA, from her personal experience, lived in Florida. And she said that she was having a lot of issues with her county. And so if you live in Florida, I absolutely recommend that you reach out to local homeschoolers before you make any decisions, because I don't want you to run into the same issues that other people have. And if you do, you are prepared. So anyway, that's option number 2, is the umbrella. Option number 3 is homeschooling with a private tutor. So this is something that has come up a lot, sort of among parents who are considering homeschooling because of COVID. People don't want to necessarily send their kids to a social distance classroom. They don't necessarily want their children to wear masks, or they're really nervous about exposing their children if they or a family member are high risk. And so this private tutor option is something that you need to investigate personally if it's something that you're interested in. If you're not personally going to be homeschooling your child, that is a legal option in Florida, but it's actually illegal here in Maryland. You have to be the one providing the instruction to your child, and you can't hire a governess, basically, to do it for you. And so if that's something that you're considering before you hire anyone, before you make a job placement announcement, anything along those lines, look at your state's regulations about who needs to be providing the instructions, because you could really run into some issues, especially if you put it in writing on the internet that you're looking for basically a governess or a private tutor. So look at your state's requirements if that's something that you're thinking about, and just make sure that it's legal. And if it's not legal, you'll have to figure out how to make a job placement announcement for something that is legal. So that's basically the state regulations in more sort of Jewish populous states, populously Jewish states. I homeschool. So if you should 100% not take this as gospel. Google your state's requirements and talk to local homeschoolers. There's a lot of nuance in these things. And so, for example, in Florida and in California, I've heard stories depending on counties. Some superintendents are flexible. I mean, this is life. Some bureaucrats take their jobs a little too seriously, and some bureaucrats don't take them seriously at all. And so it's really good to have an ear on the ground to talk to local homeschoolers about best practices, people to avoid, how to submit things so that you don't run into trouble, because you are legally allowed to homeschool. And that's a sort of position that you should go into it taking, that like, this is the thing I'm doing, and I will jump through your hoops, but this is a thing I'm doing. So if you have any questions or comments, please email me, and please subscribe to this channel. I'm going to be recording a series of episodes this summer about how to homeschool and about homeschooling in general for a Jewish community and Jewish audience. And I'll be talking about secular curriculums, math curriculums, and social opportunities, and a lot of Jewish subjects. So how to teach Hebrew, especially if you don't necessarily have the greatest Hebrew, how to find resources to teach your children Jewish subjects like Chumash, for example. There's a lot of material out there, but it's hard to wade through. And I've spent the last few weeks trying to gather as many resources as I can. If you have any suggestions or comments or anything along those lines, please email me, and subscribe to this channel and click like, all the things that you're supposed to do on YouTube that I'm just now learning. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to chatting with you again soon.